it was nerve-wracking to bring myself to calling Front Row initially, just because,
Really?
yeah, just because
Yeah.
I was like, I don't know what they're gonna ask, and I don't know how to answer it.
Well, and let's face it, our
Like
industry is kind of plagued with stigma, and
absolutely,
I mean,
yeah.
we're a few steps up from car salesmen, right? So,
There you go. Hey everybody, it's Cameron here from the first bonus episode of Framework. I've got a special guest today, and we're talking about something a little bit different than the past couple of episodes that we've done: insurance, and specifically professional and production insurance, and a few other types of insurance as well. With somebody whom I recently met, but I think whom I've made a good connection with. We've had a couple of phone calls over the past month or so, and his name's Steve, and I'll just let him do a quick introduction of himself, and he'll tell you about yourself, and then we'll kind of just jump right into a conversation about insurance. And this is a great topic that I think is very important for young filmmakers, but also filmmakers who might not be young, but might need to have a refresher on exactly what Steve does and what his company does. So Steve, I'll just let you do a little quick introduction
sounds
of
great.
yourself and your background and what company you work for.
Okay. Hey, Cameron, thanks a lot. I appreciate having me out today to talk about this. So my name's Steve Beatty. I'm with Front Row Insurance Brokers, and our brokerage firm is a Canadian company that specializes in working with companies in arts, entertainment, media, and culture. So we cover the gamut of different types of companies, whether they're film producers, animators, documentary producers, live events, live performance. We kind of go right across the spectrum in the world of entertainment. So my background is about 33, 34 years in the industry now, and for about 28 of those years, I've been working as a broker, working with clients. And about 20 years ago, I started to specialize more in the entertainment world. And it's been a transition sort of over those 20 years to the point where I now exclusively only work with companies in the arts and entertainment world. So it's been a nice transition. It's been a great opportunity to kind of take my love of the arts and meld them in with my professional life, and kind of live vicariously through many of my clients' projects. So it's kind of a cool part of, if you're going to be in the insurance business, it's kind of a fun part of it to be in. So we are brokers, and our role is to work with the film producers and to help them navigate their way through the insurance, to try and figure out what their risks are, the best way to protect themselves from those risks in a project. And then what we are is a communicator between the producer and the actual insurance company. So for most people, they wonder how it all fits in. But a broker is really the one that you're dealing with, and we're speaking with the insurance company on your behalf. So when it comes to having a broker, you do want somebody who you can communicate well with, who you get along well with, and who really can embrace sort of the vision that you have for your project and help you get it insured. So we avoid you having to talk directly to insurance companies. The only time you're going to be dealing directly with insurers and their reps are generally if you have a claim. So if you find yourself involved, something's gone sideways on a production, and now you're dealing with an insurance claim, that's when you'll start dealing directly with the insurance company. And what they would assign is an adjuster who would look after that. But again, a broker should be there to advocate on your behalf and help you through that entire process, because it can be tricky at times, and it's a pretty stressful time for most people going through an insurance claim, particularly when it's the first time. Maybe for some of your listeners, they're maybe newer producers. They've maybe bought some insurance, but they've perhaps never gone through an insurance claim. And I'll tell you, it can be stress inducing to go through. So again, looking at your broker, that's your frontline person that you want to talk to.
Yeah, and it's definitely you know, these types of things that are perceived as, you know, kind of daunting or, you know, unfamiliar for some people are, like you said, could be stress inducing. But it's good to have a good relationship with the broker that you might be dealing
Absolutely.
with, or that you
Yeah.
consistently deal with over the course of
Yeah.
you know, X number of productions. Um,
Yeah.
and so we've had a few discussions about kind of what you know, what topics to cover. I mean, there's a huge world of insurance and types of insurance and types
Yeah,
of
there are.
claims, and you know, I obviously do want this to be as you know, conversational as possible. But just to start off, let's talk about you know, we'll sort of talk about what we started with earlier, which was just that stigma that exists, you know,
Yeah.
and how we can go about utilizing platforms like this to break down some of those barriers and kind of make it a
Yeah.
little bit more accessible for people like
Yeah.
myself, who's really only purchased insurance once,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And the experience that I had with Front Row Insurance the first time was excellent. And so this is a
That's
great,
great to hear.
you know, this is a great segue into talking about insurance. Very fitting that it is with your company. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
um,
no, I hear what you're saying about the stigma. People are nervous about insurance people, right? And
yeah,
again, this is from a guy that's sold insurance now for nearly 30 years and did a lot of commercial insurance, a lot of different types of industries. And, invariably, those early conversations can be a little bit um, not awkward, but I mean, people can be nervous that somehow you're going to walk them into buying something that they don't necessarily want to buy, right?
right.
And let's face it, buying insurance isn't necessarily the sexiest thing that you get to do on your project, but it can be a really important thing. So that's why I encourage anybody who's listening to, if they've got a project, if there's something they're working on, reach out to a couple of brokers. Reach out and make either through email, ideally arrange a telephone conversation so you get to really get a sense of who the broker is, and tell them about your project, right? Tell them about what you're doing, and get their feedback really early on, because sometimes what we'll do is, we'll get people coming to us very enthusiastically about a project, and it's an exciting project, but there's certain things they may not have considered. There could be issues on a documentary. You can run into issues around privacy or confidentiality. You can run into issues around whether you can get the permission or whether you need the permission. There might be other things in a film or a TV series that present extra physical risks, right? Or there may be issues around your cast. Like if you know that you've got a cast member who's older or has maybe some past medical issues, it's important to have those conversations very early on, as early as you possibly can have, just so that you're alerted as you're negotiating your various contracts and looking at your scheduling and everything else. You're prepared, right? You're prepared right from the first get-go of when you're in development. There's nothing worse, than having somebody who's got pretty far down the pipeline, and then they discover there's something that might be either cost them more on the insurance or maybe more difficult to insure. So you want to be alerted to those very early on. And I think what you'll find as a filmmaker is, if you find a broker that you're comfortable with talking to and telling them about your project, then it's going to make it a lot less daunting, right? It's going to make it a lot easier to continue to have those conversations, and they become a partner with you, right? They become
Mm-hmm.
a professional service partner. I say the same thing for working with the entertainment lawyers as well. We're really lucky in Canada. Um, and a lot of my film and TV work is done in Canada. I have projects that shoot all over, but I mean, a lot of them are Canadian producers. But we're really lucky in Canada to have a lot of very, very excellent legal people who specialize in entertainment, but also very approachable people. And, most of them that I know will happy to pick up a call and have a chat and discuss a project and some of the issues to be thinking about, making sure that you're, as I said earlier, your releases, making sure you know what licenses you need to get, making sure that you've got the rights if there's some underlying material that your story's based on. They'll talk to you about some of those things, and that's prior to retaining them. It's something that you can just get some good information. Obviously with law firms, unlike us, you are paying them by the hour. So there is a point at which, you're going to have to put a retainer in place, but we're paid a little differently because we are paid on a commission by an insurance company, the company that ends up ultimately underwriting the policy. So yeah, definitely, and if you call a broker and it doesn't seem to be what you want, then call the next one and have that same discussion. Our job, really, their job should not be to tell you why you can't do your project. Our job should be to figure out how you get your project insured so you're not compromising, your creative vision in order to satisfy an insurance company. We really don't want insurance companies shaping the creativity of our film and TV production clients.
Yeah.
I don't know how fun TV would be then.
Exactly. And I think making it clear that insurance brokers like yourself and your colleagues and anyone at the office of Front Row or any other company that does this sort of service, they're not doing it to try and shut anybody down. They're doing it to try and find solutions for things that need solutions, or find ways to ensure the project while also maintaining the vision of the producer and the creative team. So
that's our end goal. Our end goal is to get it insured. But what I do really encourage anyone who's talking to a broker is sometimes people will be afraid to say things because, oh gosh, what if it affects the insurance or that? I tell your broker everything about your project, right? Like, make sure you don't keep anything to yourself on it.
Yeah.
Because I've had many situations, fortunately none that necessarily have been claims, but where you find out after the fact about something that took place, and you just want to we all want to have our eyes wide open when we're going into this, because policies, insurance policies are full of terms and conditions, and they have exclusions, and they have things that really can affect the outcome of a claim. And a big part of it is disclosure, is making sure we're disclosing to the insurance company, to the underwriter. So the underwriter, again, is working for the insurance company. We want to be able to disclose everything that's material. And that's a really, really critical thing. So you want to have a broker that's 100%. You also want to have a broker that's kind of probing questions and asking, okay, well, what about this? And what about doing that? And one of the beauties of dealing with a specialty broker is, they know the questions to ask. They know how a film is made. They know what the equipment is. They know when there's stunts and special effects. We have an understanding of how these things work, and therefore we're able to drill down on them together and pull the salient information and the details out so that we can communicate it well. And we'll get into conversations with clients about special effects, who's coordinating it, what's involved in it, what are the safety precautions that are being taken, are the necessary permits being obtained, licenses, fire marshals, sign-offs, are all these things being done, because we want to simply make sure that there's nothing that could occur if a claim occurs, if there's a damage or there's an injury. We want to make sure you're well set up for making the claim. You don't want anything to come out that wasn't disclosed in a claim, because it can result, depending on what the situation is, it could result in the insurance company, voiding your policy or just not paying the claim, denying the claim. And the reality is when claims are denied, it's not a happy day for anybody.
No.
You've got, as a film producer, you've got rental houses, locations, all kinds of obligations that you've got to think about.
Yeah, and the whole idea of asking those questions and having those discussions is just, doing your best to mitigate the risk of that. So
that's exactly it. That's exactly it.
I did have a question. Maybe we could talk about the different kinds of insurance.
Sure. Yeah, we can.
So, what kinds of insurance exist, and what when are they needed, and what is the difference between them? And I guess the popular ones are obviously the the production insurance, and then there's
Hmm.
also the E&O that we talked about.
Yeah,
What the
yeah.
heck is E&O?
What what the heck is E&O? So E&O is errors and emissions. That's what it stands for, and it's errors and emissions liability. So I often call it media liability, media errors and emissions liability. And what it's designed to do is it's all relating in many cases to intellectual property. So infringement of others' intellectual property, copyrights, but it also gets into things around defamation, invasion of privacy, idea misappropriation, plagiarism. All of these different things get bundled into these producers' errors and emissions policies, and you do find them generally mandated on you as a film producer. You generally are asked to get that by your financiers. It could be, public government funding. It could be private funding coming from a broadcaster or a distributor, another financial partner. And really, what it is designed to do is to respond to a claim where there's an allegation of, for instance, a copyright infringement.
Mm-hmm.
So, a situation where somebody, you've got this film, there's a screenplay for it. Somebody comes out and says, you know what, that's based on my short story that I wrote in 1985. And, they established that, they're trying to make the allegation and trying to establish that there was plagiarism and that this idea and the story has been misappropriated and now is being used in your film. And that's just one example of what can happen. We can also, documentaries, you get into other things, right? You're dealing maybe on private matters. You've got issues around consent, what facts can be shared. You might have a documentary. Something I'm always looking at on documentaries is it's one thing to have a release from somebody who's appearing as a subject in the documentary, but what happens when they start talking and telling a story about others in their lives? It could be family members, friends, spouses, ex-spouses, ex-partners. These are all things where all of a sudden those individuals haven't signed a release necessarily, and
Yeah,
you've got to start thinking about it,
yeah.
right?
There's a documentary that I haven't seen. It looks interesting, but I haven't seen the first episode yet. But there's a documentary series that came out on Netflix that was about how Donald Trump got into power, but I don't think
Oh,
he's actually in the documentary. So
yeah,
that
it's
I felt like that could be a messy situation. Like what, you know what I mean?
well,
Like I don't know exactly what's in place that allows them to talk freely about a politician, or in this case, a former president.
and it is interesting, right? You have different liberties that can be taken
Yeah.
depending on the individual, right? The public nature of the individual. Politicians have a different, than a private citizen who is just going about living their life, or somebody who, maybe doesn't understand. We've run into trouble before where somebody does sign a release, but they don't really understand exactly, what it is that how their story is going to be told, or it's, you like to think that all filmmakers, are, telling the story as it's been told to them, but things can be changed and people can be shown in a much different light. And
Mm-hmm.
that can be an issue. Even when you have a release, they could challenge that release, saying that that's not the way it was communicated to me. You also get in issues around the capacity of the individual.
Right.
Do they have the capacity to understand it? Or what if their story's been told when they're a child, and they then grow up, their parent, their guardian has signed a release on their behalf, but then they're saying, well, now I'm an adult. I don't want that story out there. So you can get into issues there, and those can come, years down the road as well. So that's where you get into the E&O. And then E&O also brings into issues like around music and anything else that's, being used in your production. So if
Yeah.
you use licensed music, that's one thing. But if you retain and engage a composer to write an original score for your project, or just original music for your then you've got to think about the originality there, and is there a risk that they've taken that music from someone else. So this is why the E&O is looked at by anyone who's funding the project. They want to make sure it's in there, because one of the risks you can potentially run into is, possible. Like, think about if all of a sudden you've got an allegation around plagiarism or using somebody else's underlying rights or breaching those rights, and all of a sudden you find yourself faced with an injunction. Production crew's ready to go, and next thing you know, boom, in comes a court injunction stopping you from producing until this gets sorted out. And that has happened. We do see it happen. It's not a common occurrence, but it's an expensive one when it occurs. And like a lot of these policies, E&O is particularly valuable for the payment of your legal fees. Because anytime we think of liability insurance, whether it's bodily injury liability or errors and omissions insurance, true value is in the payment of the legal fees to defend the claim by the insurance company. And when you consider that, most lawyers are going to be, $550 to $850 an hour, it doesn't take long to have a very large legal bill, right? When it comes to an allegation. So the policy can suddenly become very valuable at that point. And the thing is, even if the allegation's groundless, right? Even if the allegation has no basis in reality, you still have to speak to the claim, and you still have to be able to manage it and defend yourself properly. So that's where the real value comes on an E&O policy.
Yeah, and I mean, as an independent producer, the $550 an hour like kills you. Like it's when every penny is counted, it's scary. And this may not exactly relate exclusively to E&O insurance, but just insurance in general and the process. As you know, I'm dealing with two projects right now. One that's non-union, entirely non-union, and the other one is an ACTRA project. And I guess what I've been sort of unclear about, and maybe what some of our audience members and young producers and emerging producers or working producers are possibly unclear about, especially the ones that deal in independent production. They know from like a business standpoint, they might know from a business standpoint what the benefits of incorporating are. But does incorporating, would that make the process easier or different in terms of E&O or any other kinds of insurance?
It doesn't really change the process of purchasing insurance. The way the policies are set up is we're going to set them up in the name of whoever's contracting, whoever's holding the rights. You have greater legal protection as an incorporated entity as opposed to an individual. And the premise is that under a corporation, you are going to have some personal protection so that if there is a claim, your personal assets aren't necessarily at risk or vulnerable in the event of a legal claim against you. So one of the reasons, to incorporate is to give yourselves as the principals of that company some legal protection. So I think that's more the reason. Like from the standpoint, we do have people who produce projects personally, and we insure them as individuals as opposed to corporations. But certainly worth, again, when you're looking at a project, you want to make sure that you talk to your lawyer about best way to structure your corporate entity. But the policy, if you do it as an individual, it's going to respond the same way, and it's going to protect you and defend you. And whether it's an E&O policy or a bodily injury or property damage policy, it's going to respond the same way. The key thing is that what you want to do is make sure that any locations, whatever name you're putting on the policy, that should be the name that you're contracting with locations, with talent and artists, with equipment rental houses. You want to make sure it's consistent with any agreements you've got with broadcasters or distributors or other funders, right? You want to have that fairly consistent across the board. And we see that commonly where people will just set up a single purpose production company just simply to put everything within that project. It also limits, it can limit some exposure if you think of an organization that has a parent organization and multiple subsidiaries. Again, they try to keep it within the subsidiary to avoid the assets of the parent company from being exposed.
Right. The interesting thing right now is the two projects that I'm working on are very different in many different ways. The one project that's coming up next week is I'm not the producer. The producer is incorporated.
Okay.
And I believe just recently dealt with Front Row Insurance for setting up like annual insurance for the incorporation, because she plans on doing more than one per year. And I think the way that it's set up, if you do like 3 or 4 a year, it's financially it's economical for the producer.
Yeah, we can do it that way. And that is a good way to do it.
So that is an option. You don't have to,
always,
making it aware to people too. That is important, just for them to know that, it doesn't have to be like an $800 or $900 expense every time you do it. If you want,
I mean,
there are other
amortize.
options.
Yeah,
You
absolutely.
You can, under an umbrella of insurance for the year, you can do multiple productions and actually save money that way, which I think is an attractive thing to mention for some young producers. If the first thing on their mind is we want to do it a little cheaper,
Yeah, well, and that's a fair, let's face it, you want to put all your money in front of the camera, not into insurance, and we get that. And yeah, I think, doing the annual policies is a great way to go if you fit within the parameters. So usually it's, if projects are, and it would vary, but if your shooting periods are less than say 60 days or production period, for shorter format things. So like if we're doing a policy for someone who does short films or documentaries that have more of a limited production period, certainly use them for people who shoot commercials and things of that nature. Because what you don't want to do, there's two reasons. One is it's very expensive to buy an individual policy every time, but also just logistically it's easier, right? If you're going to always be using the same corporation, then you've got an annual policy. You go and rent some gear. We can issue certificates. You can put out annual certificates in many cases, so that you're not having to think about it each time. Usually when the production periods are longer, or the period of principal photography is longer, and then a longer post-production period until delivery, generally you'll find you'll set those up as individual policies just specifically for that project. And it's a nice way to go. But I mean, when you're thinking of the insurance, I think you kind of got to think about it from the standpoint of insuring your things and things that you're responsible for, and then other people's things and other people if they get injured, right? It's kind of I always call it a first party, which is yourself, and a third party, which are other people, right? So, you've got, if you're shooting, for everything that you shoot, for instance, all your data, if you're shooting, digitally, then you've got that's your property. You want to consider whether that's something you want to insure. So if you have a technical issue, or you have something that damages, your cards or your drives, and you have to go back and reshoot something, consideration, do I want to insure that? Is that something of mine that I want to insure? If you have your own equipment package, your company has some camera and lighting equipment, again, first party, do you want to insure that? Is that a risk you need to insure? We do tend to throw the rental equipment in under those same covers, because while they're somebody else's property, they are under your care, right? So we treat them as though they're your property, and we insure them the same way as we'd insure your property. And when you get into the third party, or that's where we talked about E&O, but then we've got situations where, like, if somebody's injured on set, how do we deal with that, right? Or a passerby gets injured, right? Or you're shooting in a location and a light sets off a sprinkler head and starts to flood the building that you're in. These are all third-party claims, and that's where it's hard to quantify sometimes what your exposure is. A little easier when you're looking at your own stuff, because the value of it, how much it costs to produce what you've produced. But the third-party stuff is where the money really, where the dollars can be significantly spent on legal fees, and also satisfying what the damages are. So these are things to think about.
And would that under the umbrella of third party, is that general liability insurance? Is that separate, or
that's commercial general liability, exactly. Yeah.
And that's like that would be a big portion of the premium for your short shoot insurance, or what have you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's
like depending what you're doing, right? Like
yeah.
it'll be based on the risk level. So something that's fairly innocuous isn't going to have a huge premium attached to it. But if you're getting into something with special effects or stunts, or you start looking at other lines of liability exposure, like you know, aircraft, watercraft, things of that nature, all of a sudden you can start adding in
Hmm.
additional premium for those things. Again, these are all reasons to be talking early with somebody about it. So they can say, oh, okay, so you're planning to do this. So you're going to have to factor in, what is the risk? What is the premium going to be? What kind of coverage do we have to look at if you're doing certain activities? But the commercial general liability is what you'll see most of your locations asking for.
Yeah.
They're going to be part of rental agreements
Yeah.
of all kinds.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm producing a film called Distance, and it's a sci-fi project where we're building a set sort of in an abandoned classroom. I mean, it's
Okay.
not abandoned in the sense that there's asbestos or anything, but like it's a new space that's about the size of a classroom, and the situation is director's sister is ACTRA, and
Okay.
they kind of conceived the project together, and so she was from the beginning kind of intended as the lead, but of
Okay.
course, with that comes the involvement of the union, the
Right.
involvement of her agent, and the necessity for the other actor to be union as well.
Of course.
So there's factors involved that are unfamiliar to me because I've only ever produced in the non-union space.
Right. Right.
But I reached out to her agent and ACTRA to get a guidance on how to do like a low budget ACTRA
Okay.
project, which
Yeah.
there are guidelines for.
Right.
Longer than my arm, but there are guidelines. And of course, the necessity for $2 million general liability insurance, similar to if you were to do like rental equipment, which we are also doing, is required. And then there was a one additional piece of the puzzle for insurance, which was WSIB and or AOS, accident onset insurance.
Right. Yeah.
And we had a phone call actually about
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
project to talk about
Yeah.
if I needed both or which or how that worked and what that was gonna cost me on top of the premium for the production insurance.
Right.
So that's kind of the situation that we're in. And also something to add to, which I might have mentioned, is the crew is volunteer non-union.
Got it.
We are traveling there's no special scenes of violence or stunts or intimacy or any sort of things like
Okay.
that.
Okay.
So there's nothing like that exists. And it's unclear as to what the value of the equipment's going to be because we have a potential for a sponsorship. But if we don't get the sponsorship, obviously we'll have less equipment due to
Right. Right.
costs.
Yeah. Yeah.
If we get the sponsorship, we'll have a commercial vehicle. If not, not.
Okay.
So that's kind of the situation that I'm in right now. We're shooting
Yeah.
at the
Yeah.
end of October, which is exciting. It's a great learning experience.
Yeah.
But maybe there's something that, from my explanation that you noticed that we
Yeah,
can
there's a whole
discuss.
bunch there actually,
Yeah.
to kind of like, and it's worth sort of unpacking all of that because this is a very what you've just the way you've explained it is a very typical conversation that we will have with our clients and prospective clients. So it's a perfect sort of case study to think about. So
Mhm.
looking at your people, so your actors and your crew, there's two different thoughts I have there. So for your ACTRA contracted, the ones you're engaging under an actor contract, ACTRA does require that you have, and this is pretty typical of any union, they do require that you have some accident insurance, some insurance available to their members if they are injured and that they have to, sustain, there's medical bills or there's loss of potential wages and things of that nature. So what actors say is that you have a choice. You can either go with WSIB, which is the Workplace Safety and Insurance Board, and that's a provincial workers' compensation insurance. You'll find in each of the provinces in Canada, they each have a provincially managed government program for workers' comp. So actors say, look, in Ontario, you can go to WSIB and insure the people there. Or what ACTRA have is accident on set that you mentioned. And accident on set is considered an equivalent to WSIB. And it really is a very broad plan. It's probably the most equivalent I've ever come across in the province for insuring actors. The thing is with WSIB, they won't insure stunt performers, so they become a non-option if you are engaging stunt people. So you have to go the AOS thing. I quite like the AOS thing. I think it's a great option for you to go with as a filmmaker. And so that's ensuring your talent, your artists, right? And then you mentioned you've got
just let me cut in just a second we'll go into the volunteer crew in just a sec. But something you said was I think worth noting, that less so on the insurance side, more so the ACTRA guidelines side. The ACTRA guidelines for their low budget guidelines shortened to LBG, and they have tiers for production. So under $50,000 budgets is the space that we're living in. So the budget for our film is about 10,000, just under 10,000.
Okay, all right.
So they have different requirements for obviously what you pay for the actors. Also on the accident on set, they outline how the cost for that is evaluated, and that depends a little bit on how many days and how many actors and things like that. So,
got it.
It does clarify. ACTRA does clarify fairly clearly that it's WSIB or AOS, but AOS is required for stunt performers.
Yes.
So I think it's just good to just clarify that for anybody who's like me, who's going into a similar situation.
Yeah. And now we've also come across recently, we do a lot of performing arts, and up until the pandemic, up until COVID-19, we didn't have many ACTRA members being engaged for theater productions. But now what we're finding is that even where they're engaging, theater performers, there's the need for an ACTRA contract.
Right.
And so we've been asked in many cases. Now, some of our clients have gone the AOS route on that, but we have found that ACTRA have also accepted what we're able to arrange, which is an occupational accident policy. Not nearly as broad, and it's really important to know that it's not nearly as broad as AOS, but it is something that they may, accept. But it's worth, as a producer, if I was the producer, I'd look at it and say, well, what's AOS going to cost me for those engaged members? What's it going to cost for something in the open market, and compare what am I getting, and am I giving them the broadest coverage I can?
Yeah.
Now that's always a consideration too when you've got crew that aren't union, where you're not required to necessarily put insurance in place for them, but consideration, especially on, I know unfortunately with the lower budgets, it makes every dollar so important.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I think about, and I guess it comes from more sort of a moral compass, is, you've got people volunteering their time.
Yeah.
And, you're all in this project to try and make something that's hopefully a good springboard to the next one.
Yeah.
But, the question to ask yourself is, should we or do we want to have some occupational insurance available to those people if they happen to be injured while working? See, unlike situations where we have WSIB involved, so when you have the workers' comp, the provincial workers' comp, and this is consistent across all of the provinces, there's statutory protection against lawsuits from injured parties, right? So injured employees or workers. When you get outside of that world where you're not participating in WSIB, then an injured party could actually sue you as the producer for somebody's injury. And, I've seen this happen. I've had claims where, individuals have been injured. I had one that I'll never forget, somebody was injured very, very severely, and they didn't have any direct accident insurance. Now, you'll find with our programs, under the commercial general liability policy, we will generally build in a coverage known as employer's liability. And employer's liability is what's going to respond if there's a lawsuit that stems or emanates out of that injury.
Right.
Okay, so no workers' comp, they can sue you. And then what we've got to do is say, even if they don't have accident insurance, we got to make sure that you as a producer are going to be defended for that claim.
Mm-hmm.
The sad reality is they do have to establish, negligence. They do have to establish liability. And without those two things, you're not going to be obliged, and the policy is not going to be obliged to pay them. So you could have somebody who's volunteered their time, worked for you, done a great job, been injured, and then not have any financial recourse if they can't establish that there's liability on the part of the producer.
Yeah.
And it's also a protracted process. Let's face it, a lawsuit doesn't settle quickly.
No.
And so therefore, you've got that. So as a producer, it's always a consideration, right? Do we insure them? Do we not?
Absolutely. And an important consideration, right? I mean, it's all about the evaluation of risk and the risk you're willing to take,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
where, it is, even though it is about ifs, and sometimes ifs are iffy, there is risk attached to,
calculated risk, right?
there
Absolutely.
is a calculated risk, and anything that you can have in place, and of course, like I said, and like you reiterated, the low budget projects have this tough decision to make, where every penny is counted, and they might not be answering to an external financier, and everything's sort of privately funded. They have their own finances to consider, but something else that you have to think about as a producer is how much it could cost you if something were to go wrong. So,
well, this is it, eh? I mean, and without sounding too much like an insurance salesman, the reality is that if the premium's a problem to afford, dealing with it uninsured is going to be a real problem.
There's going to be a real problem. Yes.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
if $1,000 on a premium is going to be a big issue, like a $10,000 legal bill or
Yeah.
50,000 is a nightmare, right?
That's
So it's,
right.
again, it sounds, but it's, what it is though for me, honestly, Cameron, is that it's important that my clients of all sizes, it's more important they know what they're not insured for than really what they are insured for. So
Yeah.
again, going back to the importance of the conversation, saying, okay, so what do we got? Here's all of this risk. So let's talk about, it's like you and I did actually, you talk on one of your projects about the vehicles, right? How do we deal with the vehicles?
That's right,
Do we
yeah.
insure them under the policy that you're arranging, or do you insure it with the rental agency? Is there an option for that? And weighing it out, what's the cost of premium on your policy versus the rental agency's daily rate? What are the deductibles? So the deductibles being the amount that you pay if there's damage.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's important to be able to have that conversation in a way that you understand and you're able to have good information to make good decisions, and it doesn't mean you buy insurance for everything, but it means that you make good decisions, good business decisions around it, because the worst calls to have as a broker is when somebody calls you, tells you something's occurred, and they didn't bring it up, or you didn't have the conversation, or it wasn't clear. It's better just to have these conversations before something has happened, and then make the decisions, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you're making a film, you're making hundreds of decisions. These all should be decisions you make as well.
Absolutely.
Right.
And we in terms of the vehicles, we did talk a little bit about if you're renting a vehicle, or if a vehicle is being provided, for example, by not like a company like U-Haul, but a company like Ontario Camera, for example, who might have a Sprinter van or something like
Right.
that
Right.
that you use to carry your equipment from point A to point B. And then the other vehicles, of course, that are involved on a day-to-day basis are personal vehicles. So like you might have your key grip driving to set using their own personal
Driving their own vehicle.
vehicle to set. And
Yeah.
most of the time, most of the time, I'm pretty sure it's all the time, those vehicles are insured by them personally.
They would be.
So if they were to get into an accident driving to work in a paid or unpaid situation, feel free, any way that you can answer the question, feel free. How does your insurance, like, at what point does do they become your responsibility, I guess? Because
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Now you've
No, it's a
got
great
two
question.
policies sort of
Yeah.
battling each other, right?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. And, let's just using Ontario, let's use Ontario as an example.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if it's their own personal vehicle, it'll be their insurance would be kind of considered to be the primary insurance in on an automobile accident scenario. But, the risk comes for you as the producer because you hired them.
Mm-hmm.
And all you need someone to do is say, okay, so this person had the accident. Ontario is a bit different. We have a no fault automobile system here. So, but you do get a right to sue somebody if you've substantially injured them, right? There's some thresholds, but the reality, let's assume we've got a bad accident, somebody's been injured, they have the right to sue that individual. The question is going to be, well, what were they doing at the time they were driving? Oh, they were working for this film production company. Okay, so let's tie them in, because let's face it, the more parties you bring into a claim, the better chance you've got of having some success. And so there, as a producer, as the employer, if you will, the
Mm-hmm.
engager, all of a sudden you can find yourself in the claim. And what we do on our programs, and you'll see it on most insurance policies, is something called non-owned automobile liability. And that's actually designed to respond to those types of claims. When you find yourself brought in on a claim that's come as a result of a vehicle you don't own, which has either injured somebody or damaged somebody's property. So
Mm-hmm.
your scenario right there would be covered by non-owned auto. It can also respond when you've got a rented vehicle. So your scenario of the Sprinter van, you've got, as the owner of that vehicle, they will have insurance on it, but you want to make sure that you've got this non-owned automobile liability insurance. But what they'll probably ask you to do in addition to the liability insurance is they'll want you to insure the physical damage of the vehicle. So
Right.
if it gets into an accident, the damage needs repaired, needs replacement, they're going to want you to insure that. And again, that's something you can put under your production insurance
Yeah.
if you want. What I was saying earlier, though, is I always say to people, when you're into shorter term rentals, a couple of days here or there, it's always worth looking at whether you have an option with the agency that you're getting the vehicle from and insuring it with them. And the reason, the most compelling, we see all, we can have a production go flawlessly, but someone's going to drive into something, right? At
Yeah.
some point,
Oh
someone's
yeah.
going to back in, right?
I've been on one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
We've all been
And
on one.
someone's rushing around, a PA's rushing around, something happens, boom,
Yeah.
they back into another car, or they back into a pillar, or they do something.
Yeah.
So what you'll find because of this on production insurance packages, the deductibles are relatively high. And so therefore, you could find, yourself with a $2,500 deductible. It could go all the way up to 10,000, because it's usually a bit of a sliding scale depending on how much damage has occurred. And, there's an unbudgeted amount. All of a sudden you're having to draw out of your budget to figure out how to pay the deductible. So sometimes, again, on a shorter period, it might be more economical to look and say, well, does Enterprise, does whoever it is that I'm renting my vehicles from, do they offer me an insurance option? How much will it cost me? And what's the deductible if
Mm-hmm.
somebody damages a vehicle? On the longer term projects where we've got vehicles out for longer periods of time, and a lot of them, it's not economically feasible to generally insure through the agency. So we'll pick those up under the production policies. But again, these are things like just to bring to the surface to talk about and make good decisions around.
Yeah, and I mean, it's less so applicable. What I'm about to say is less so applicable to perhaps a short film independent production environment where, again, you are scraping pennies. But it's obviously good practice to have a contingency in your budget. So
Yes.
taking 8 or 10 or 11 or 12% of the subtotal on your budget sheet and calculating that and making it a contingency is a good practice.
It is.
Is a good practice. I mean, obviously, with the higher the budget, the higher the contingency. So perhaps and the longer the process too. So if you have a feature film, for example, you're going to be working for longer. and then therefore it increases the likelihood of having an accident. But
Yeah, it
you
does.
could
More vehicles
more
too, right?
vehicles, yeah.
More
You could
possible option, yeah, opportunities for people to drive into things.
yeah, and if you save the contingency, maybe your contingency is $10,000, $20,000. That's a lot of glory hole donuts at the end of the day for your company's marketing
It
campaign,
sure is. Yeah.
right?
The thing
Um,
is that and it's important. I'm glad you brought that up about contingencies because, you got to remember that all of these insurance coverages have deductibles,
yeah.
right? So you want to make sure you understand your deductibles, and what you'll get is a summary. It'll list the deductibles. Make sure you're comfortable with it. Some of them are mandated on us by the insurance company, but you also have some options, maybe to decide what your deductible is going to be. And in certain cases, deductibles, if you take a higher deductible, if you can afford it, it can be a way as well of managing the cost a little bit and bringing it down. Depending again on the scale of the production, higher premiums, you've got more latitude there to negotiate
Hmm.
a deductible and bringing the premium down. But they're all, again, knowing what you've got there. And I always like working with producers and production managers and line producers that are looking at the summaries of coverage that we give them and understanding it rather than just saying, okay, does the premium fit within the line item on the
Oh,
budget?
right. Yes. Yeah.
Right? Like it's like, okay, it fits, it
Yeah.
works. And
It
then they go
works.
on and they never think about the insurance again. It's far better off, like, look at it and then you don't have surprises, right? Because one of the first questions I always get when someone reports a claim is, so what is our deductible? Like, how much is our deductible going to be? So I know a lot of people don't look at it, even though we try to give them very
Yeah,
detailed,
and this is
summaries.
yeah, and this is interesting. I think I heard this somewhere. I don't know if it's totally true, but because I wouldn't be familiar with the American system, but I heard that the way that a Canadian production budgets is different from the way that American production budgets. The way that the Americans do it is they take a script, and from the script and the schedule and the arrangements, they get quotes for everything, and those are the values that they put into the budget. And when they send
Mm,
that budget to the distributor as part of the pitch, it either gets approved or it doesn't. It either gets approved or it doesn't. But the way that
yeah.
Canadians budget is, you'll put a value into that line item before actually obtaining a quote.
Yeah. Well,
But the
you know,
Americans take the quote and that value goes into their line item, and then they try and save money by getting multiple quotes from multiple companies.
yeah, and trying to leverage it, right? So
Yeah.
that you leverage it. And the thing is that, yeah, I mean, I guess different producers, line producers, production managers have different ways of budgeting,
Hmm.
right? But we do get a lot of phone calls, and I'm happy always to take those calls and work with clients in this terms of establishing what an insurance budget is going to be. And then your line item is pretty darn close to what it's going to be. I generally will give a fairly liberal indication just so that they've got a bit of buffer, a
Yeah.
bit of contingency on it, and then
Yeah.
we will send it out to multiple insurers, and we'll have them all quote, and we'll try and create a bit of competition between the insurers in order to get the best premium and the best scope of coverage in terms on the table for the client. So it is a process that takes place. And again, one of the things going back to is like having some lead time. If you have some lead time, it gives us the opportunity to really manage that process effectively. It's hard when, someone comes in and says, okay, we're going to start shooting on Friday. It's Monday morning. We need to get insurance. And you're like, okay, so we're trying to rush the process.
Yeah.
Leave the time, like go out, get the applications done, the questionnaires, submit your budgets and your shooting schedules. It doesn't all have to be nailed down exactly as it's going to play out,
Hmm.
but at least get it into the hopper. And then you're not rushing and you're not taking the first thing. And the problem is too, right? When you're rushing, you don't want to even, you don't even necessarily want to have the conversations I'm suggesting you have with your broker about things like vehicles and risk and
Hmm.
all of that, right? And something could get missed because people are rushing at that point. So
Yeah.
little lead time, because realistically, for us to manage a process, as you know, we have our online products, which are fantastic. They're self-serve. You can get in there, get your policy arranged. But if we're having to go to insurance companies, we're having to negotiate, we're having to do a lot of Q&A back and forth. They may be interested in certain elements of the production that need more information.
Mm-hmm.
You want to allow yourself a reasonable amount of time, like 30 to 45 days. It is ideal, right? Because you're not rushing, you're getting, everybody's getting the information they need. And in the end, that's going to be better for you as the producer, because you're going to get the best premium, and you're going to have time to make all those decisions we're talking about.
Yeah, and on the Front Row Insurance website, like you started to allude there, the short shoot production insurance, very easy to
It is.
to go in, and I think there's like
it's a
5 or
great
6
thing.
different steps. Once everything's filled out, you can literally get your quote and purchase the premium for the insurance at the same time.
Yeah, and you get your certificates, right? So that you can
Exactly.
issue your
So
certificates, and
I
it fills a really important spot in the entertainment world for sure.
yeah,
Those are great
and
products.
we started by talking about the stigma, and I think the people generally that I am in contact with more the younger crowd of people who kind of just are just sort of starting out. That's generally where I got a lot of the stigma, and it's like, well, I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
Front Row makes it so easy. Front Row.
Yeah, well, emerging filmmakers are important to
people,
us, right?
Yeah,
That's
and
very important to us.
most short film production shoots are less than 15 days. So the short shoot is an excellent program, like an excellent way for somebody to get if they are in a time crunch, and the nuts and bolts of the policy don't have to be discussed as as specifically as perhaps it would if you were in a situation where you have a longer production or a more specialized tons of stunts, tons of violence, tons of this, tons of that kind of thing, and there has to be that discussion. But it's important that people know that it's not hard. Like to get a quote, you can get a quote in less than 30 minutes, and
it's super fast.
It's super fast, and and it's under the 2 times I've done it, this time and the last time, it's under $1,000 to get a nice quote for say $85,000 worth of equipment, and maybe a simple prop sets, wardrobe type of allocation, and this is proof that just discussing it with your broker is easier than maybe some people realize. So I think more people should go out and just give them a call.
Get to know all the insurance brokers, right?
Yeah, give them a call.
Expand your network to include insurance brokers. I want to just make a point on the short shoot. Sorry there.
No worries.
But what's nice about that product as well is you're not compromising or sacrificing coverage on the premium. We've got the same types of coverages that we put on the larger projects. It's just the premium is scaled to the size of the smaller projects. So it's not as though you have to be sacrificing the risk protection in order to get a premium. And that's why we built it the way we did, because we didn't, we wanted people to be able to, okay, they're doing a short project. Yes, they need it quickly, or they need a quote at 2 a.m. when they're working through their budget, and they need to know how much that insurance is going to cost. And it's been a great success for us. So we're really happy. And as I say, emerging filmmakers, new filmmakers, those are important to us, because, many of those go on, to produce great, great productions, larger productions. And it's nice for us to get to know them right from day one. And we've seen many of our clients go from $1,000 policy up to, the policies that are hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? Just because the scale of their projects grew.
Yeah, exactly. And, it's just so like you said, it's so funny because a lot of young filmmakers and younger producers will do their budget at 2:00 in the morning. I mean, this is at this point for younger producers, a lot of them have a part-time job that's
Yeah,
you
for
know,
sure.
allowing them to do
Yeah,
this,
to pursue
to
this
pursue this
passion, right?
passion, and
Yeah,
hopefully
yeah,
eventually turn the passion into a full-time job somewhere down the line, or like you said, get a bigger project.
yeah, yeah,
You know, when it comes to bigger projects, you might not be producing right away, but it's a good way of also, um, learning the process through like a shorter
yeah.
process where,
Absolutely. Where it's
um,
not quite as complex,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
Where
Yeah,
it's,
yeah.
it's got all the moving parts, but and also too, it's great opportunity because this is where you're establishing your network, isn't it? Of people at the locations, or sorry, at the rental houses, post production. Like you're getting all of these different contacts, right? So
Hmm.
as part of that, it should be an insurance broker, an accountant,
Yeah,
a lawyer, all of those professional service providers. Great time to do it. Yeah.
yeah. And the time to do it is early on in the
Yeah,
process.
it's good habits, right? I've always felt that in business that, regardless of what you're doing, if you approach it in a way that, you do it the same way every time, it's going to make it a lot easier down the road, right? Even when there's variables, and let's
Hmm.
face it, making a movie or making anything is going to have variables along the way.
Absolutely, and hundreds of decisions. The We're at a good point, I think. An hour
Okay.
17.
Oh
Um,
yeah, wow, that's incredible.
but we did talk before about possibly doing this again, and we will have to meet in person eventually. I told Grant that I would love to
I'd like
come
to do
and,
that.
and visit and
Yeah,
just say
oh, that'd be
hi.
awesome. Yeah.
The Before we go, we'll just quickly summarize. We talked a little bit about E&O and production insurance and the different kinds of insurance. We talked about timelines and accessibility and stigma and dealing with front row insurance and the difference between brokers and insurance companies. We talked a little bit about the specific aspects of your insurance plan, claims in different situations, and all those decisions. I think this is a really great discussion for people to learn something, or at least get them started on their process in dealing with a broker, and hopefully highlights the importance of bringing brokers and lawyers and professionals on board. Even if it's just to ask questions, not
Yeah.
too many questions if it's a lawyer because they'll be expensive. But
Yeah, we
but
never want
just
to ask too many
just
questions.
bringing them on board to just keep learning, that
Well,
kind
it
of
is.
thing.
It's
So
learning, right? And it's learning what you don't know, and then applying it to the next situation too, right? Knowing what
exactly,
the more you know, the better your questions can be, and the better your questions, the better the answers, right?
that's
So,
right. Yeah.
yeah,
So www.frontrowinsurance.com.
that is
Um,
it.
it's not just based in Toronto. I don't think we said that.
No, we didn't actually say that, did we?
There are other offices across Canada, and I think in the United States. Why, you have an
Yeah, so
office in
we have
LA
a
as well?
office. Yeah,
Yeah.
We have Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal, and then LA, as you said, and then we've got some people in New York, and that's pretty much what we've got right now. And but through that group, we're able to service all kinds of
Yeah, yeah.
productions, shot in all places around the world. So
And it's important. It's obviously important to note that while we were chatting, we were referencing Ontario and Canada mostly.
yes,
But if you do have a situation that is outside of Ontario or Canada, that things might change. The specifics of certain
yeah,
things and laws in
there's
different regions might change. So just keep that
yeah,
in mind,
yeah,
obviously.
yeah,
But
absolutely. Got to keep
your
that in
broker
mind.
can help you. So
Well, yeah, we certainly can.
www.frontrowinsurance.com.
Thank you.
How does somebody get in touch with you or your office?
Certainly, they're welcome to email me as a main contact. It's easy. It's Steve at frontrowinsurance.com.
There you go.
And then what I can do is help them myself, or I can refer them to one of my colleagues that may have a different specialty, but we can certainly get them pointed in the right direction, and I'd be happy to do that.
Fantastic. And all the information is on the website too. So I believe your phone
Yeah,
number is
lots
on the
of information.
website,
We've
and,
got an extremely active blog, some
there
great
you go.
information there. We're
Yeah.
always trying to improve it, always trying to put things in there that people can learn from. So definitely go to the Front Row website and have a look at the different blogs, and they're all written by our people, so you'll get to know all those different names as well.
Somewhere to start, and
It is somewhere to start.
And always welcome to call Front Row too. They're, Steve's been great when we've been chatting, and I had some good experiences with other colleagues of yours. So
yeah, I love a conversation. It's the greatest way to go. Email's one thing, but we get to know each other better when we get to hear each other's voices. That's for sure.
That's exactly right. And just so everybody on, Framework, the last podcast about film, is brought to you by Red Curtain Entertainment. You can reach out to our show by emailing rcepodcasts@gmail.com if you have questions or concerns or comments or suggestions for future episodes. Or if you have a company similar to Front Row and you want to do something similar, just to spread the wealth of information, we're happy to do that as well. So send us an email, and we'd love to chat with you. Thanks so much, Steve, for coming on
Cameron,
the show.
thank you.
And for chatting, and we'll do it again.
An absolute pleasure.
It was a fantastic. Thank you so much. A great experience, and also thank you, Kevin, too, for helping us out in the background.
Thanks, Kevin.
Good luck with the rest of your day there, and the training and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, we're bringing lots of new people on, so it's great.
That's great.
All right.
That's
okay.
Great.
Thanks, Cameron.
All right,
you have
Steve.
a great day.
You too. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.